quite a few people write in to say, but there was one in particular here that I will quote.
Sure.
She said she is 35 and been masking her whole life. She believes that she does have, that she is AuDHD. However, I've been, quote, masking for so long, I don't even know how to begin unmasking in a public setting or for an evaluation. I'm afraid of being dismissed. Can you offer any advice to folks who are in the early process of seeking evaluation?
Yeah, so it's hard because when you've been doing it your entire life, you might recognize that it's happening, but there's that question of who even am I without the mask? And you know what? I'm not going to talk clinically. I'm going to tell you what I did. But something that someone said to me shortly after I got shortly after I was misdiagnosed, and I was asking, like, you know, is there more here that they didn't realize? And another autistic person said that they found it really helpful. The first thing they did to unmask was that they privately, by themselves in their house, just did some stims that they knew that other autistic people did. So they said that they just, like, privately in their own home just flapped their hands for 30 seconds. And they just started noticing, like, you know what, I've never, as far as I recall, I've never done these motions before, but wow, they do help me to self-regulate. So that's something that I did in my own house too, that I was starting to get stressed out, and I did some flapping and walked in a circle, and I was like, this actually is really helpful. And so some of the unmasking was just, I'm going to try something that someone else who's unmasked did and found helpful, and then I'm going to tweak it to see if it's helpful to me. I strongly believe that every single one of us should be safe to unmask and stim and be authentic in public. And also, I do recognize that we live in an ableist, discriminatory world, and those things go just, you know, me stimming in public carries very different risks than a person of color stimming in public. People think you're acting weird in public. Weird. I'm using the term, I'm not saying stimming is weird, but, you know, acting weird can lead to very real dangers for certain demographics. So sometimes, even though masking is not healthy, there are times that people do it because it's keeping them safe. So doing it on your own in private can help you start to recognize who you are without getting that backlash, even if it's just dirty looks, all the way up to an actual dangerous confrontation. In the safety of your home can definitely be a good place to start that.
That is wonderful advice. Our next question is sort of the next step. How can I go about researching the right provider who is open to someone who is AuDHD? Most of those I've spoken with are kind of, as you said, like, it's only within the last decade that even the DSM has recognized that these two, you know, conditions can exist in the same person. Are there criteria or questions that you can offer to help people discern that they are seeking help from the right provider?
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Because that's a hard thing, because, you know, when you get an evaluation, you're not going in and saying, I need you to tell me that I have this. You're going in saying, I need you to help me figure out if I have this. So unfortunately, that means that providers who make mistakes, you know, like if the provider's wrong, if the provider has a misconception about AuDHD, that, like, when I say we, I mean me as, like, lived experience, face the consequences of that. So you are allowed to ask questions before you commit to scheduling with someone. Providers have different boundaries around their availability. For example, many do a 15-minute phone call where you can pick their brain. Phone calls are very draining for me just because of how my brain is. So a boundary that I set is I don't do those 15-minute consult calls, but potential clients are more than welcome to email me their questions, and I will write a response to them. So questions you might ask: first, I am very open about my diagnoses. It's not a requirement. I don't think, to self-disclose because it is personal information. Someone might not feel safe. And I will say, I did not publicly disclose my diagnoses until I was fully self-employed, because that is when I felt safest to be open about that. I'm not going to fire me for having ADHD. So, some people don't feel safe being open, but you also have the right to seek out providers who have chosen to self-disclose that. You can ask them before scheduling, what's your experience with assessing someone in my demographic? Whether that's, your gender, your ethnicity, your cultural background, your age. You can say, what is your understanding and what is your experience of assessing someone like me? And you can ask them about neurodiversity affirming care, which is that understanding that neurodivergence is not a problem to be solved or something bad or shameful, and taking that more collaborative client-centered approach, recognizing, clients come to me for assessments. I don't always see them unmasked because they might not have figured out who that is, or they might not have felt comfortable enough with me to show me that side of themselves. And I strive to create an environment where my clients do feel comfortable showing me their unmasked selves, but I'm not entitled to that. For any reason at all, they might not feel safe showing that side of themselves to me. So ask them about their ability to assess someone who is high masking can be another question to ask.
So helpful. Thank you. And, I would like to just quickly really express my thanks to the audience here today. We have had more than 2,100 people, and we're up to 450 questions and comments. And they are among the most thoughtful that I've ever seen in my time at Attitude, which is decades. So I'm getting, it makes me emotional. This is a really important presentation. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I would like to
authentic here.
Thank you. Super authentic to the max. Okay. Another person wrote in to say, I feel like people don't fully believe me when I explain AuDHD burnout, and that I'm just being dramatic. How do you counter people who belittle your experience?
Yes. So first of all, it is not your job to prove that you're struggling enough or struggling in the right way. And honestly and truly, there have been situations where someone has had that response to me, and I have said, well, if that's the way that you're going to interact with me, then you're not going to have the option of interacting with me. You're allowed to set that boundary, because frankly, I don't have the capacity to explain to everybody and to justify what my needs are. I'm allowed to say, well, you don't have to get it. But I will often point people to other educational resources. It's also it's also a big part of my role to educate the general public. So I'll even point people to my own blog and I'll be like, well, I've written about this actually. But no one else is inside your brain except for you. Even your therapist, your significant other, the person who evaluated you. No one is inside your brain and knows your firsthand experience like you do. And some people are not going to get it, and that sucks. I was actually talking earlier today about people, about that autistic experience of not being understood, and thinking, if I can just explain it just right, if I can just explain it better and give more information, then people will understand what I'm trying to say. And that's just not what's going to happen sometimes. So I try to keep a few go-to educational tools and say, please look into this and understand why what you just said is very harmful. And if they're open to that education, then we can talk about it. And if they're not, then I say, well, in order to have access to my energy, I'm not going to give you that access to me if you're going to talk to me that way.
I would like to suggest that this webinar, which we will send the replay link to everyone who registered later on today or early tomorrow, that this webinar would be an excellent resource to share for those who you think
send them my
have.
way. Because this takes no additional energy from me because we've recorded it. So everybody can just watch it. We can just say, go watch this thing I already made.
Recycle, reuse. Let's go.
Yes.
Okay. Another listener wrote in to say that they are currently experiencing burnout in their profession. And after decades in that profession, and can you offer advice for investigating career paths that might be more affirming and sustainable?
So there's not a right answer to this because each person is going to have their own needs. Again, speaking to my own experience, being my own boss has been huge for protecting me from professional burnout, but not everyone is in a position to start a business, and not every line of work lends itself to starting a bit. I'm married to a nurse, and you can't be a freelance bedside nurse. Like, there's not really, the profession doesn't lend itself to that. So that's not an option for everybody. But I found, because then I can decide, here is what my scope of practice is. I've got nobody but myself, I will say. I do. Nobody pressuring me to work beyond my capacity, no external person giving me productivity requirements. So having that space where I am in control was huge for me. Although you do have to be able to set your own boundaries with that, because there's also an autistic tendency to have a job within your special interest. And go, and have difficulty stopping yourself until you overload yourself in that way. But working positions that have flexibility with things like being able to work remote, because in my house, I get to decide how bright the lights are. I get to decide what the volume is. I'm never going to forget my lunch again because it's in the kitchen over there. Things like that, creating, the environment that fits your sensory needs and being able to operate in that particular environment. If you're like me and you hate, meetings, finding jobs where those meetings are not mandatory, things like that. So kind of figuring out what's the ideal environment where you thrive, and then what job gives me that environment, basically.
Right. And that's not easy. Okay, I'm going to throw in one last question. It is tough to decide, but I wanted to recognize that, as you said, autism and ADHD are both highly genetic. And we have a lot of parents here who are AuDHD, who are burned out, parenting a neurodivergent child. And I wonder if there are specific resources, community support that can help with that population that obviously doesn't get a day off.
Right. Yeah. And, if you're a parent of a neurodivergent kid and you're like, you've never considered it for yourself, I'm not diagnosing you, but I cannot tell you how many times I've had a conversation with a parent being like, what do you mean my kid's ADHD? What do you mean my kid's autistic? I do those things too. And I say, yeah, about that. So getting to know yourself, because as a parent, you're really, really primed to, what does my child need? Put my child's needs first. And that's great. But when it's done to your own detriment, that can often lead to, you can't show up for your child if your needs aren't being met. I mean, you deserve to have your needs met as a parent, as a human being, like as a human being outside of your role as a parent. And also you can't show up as a parent unless you're also taking care of yourself. Having community support, that the whole, it takes a village, having other, even especially neurodivergent parents. A colleague of mine does a group for kids. And she shared that the parents of the kids in her group were in the waiting room while she was running the group, and she came out and they had started a group chat together to be able to give each other that support, which is really like a really cool experience. But finding your own community and your own support in that is huge. And even if it's not, you know, if official diagnosis is not the safe option for you, at least, you know, seeking out community of, you know, of people who, your people who get you, basically.